Hi. So it's quite late. I don't want to be too loud, but I want to touch on something that I've noticed in, let's say, dialogue. Um, it's something I've noticed for a long time now, and I'm sure I've touched on it in other videos, but I think the Kamala Harris, Mike Pence vice presidential debate kind of reiterated this issue. I actually made a video about that, but there was a sound problem, so I had to take it down. There's a light there, it's fine. That's not the moon, that's just a light in my room. That's better. Okay, so I'll just talk briefly about the Pence-Harris debate before getting into the main theme of this video, or rather the broader subject. So it was mostly quite a civil debate. It got kind of distracted by the fly that appeared on Pence's head. Um, Pence has pretty white hair, and that fly was quite obvious. I thought it was my TV screen at first, but it was pretty obvious. Anyway, CNN very predictably after the debate immediately homed in on Jake Tapper on CNN, immediately homed in on supposedly Kamala Harris having to be very cautious because she was a minority woman. Now, I take the view actually it's Mike Pence who had to be cautious because he's a middle-aged white man. What I mean by that, I mean that it's Pence, not Harris, who is far more likely to be accused of some sort of bigotry, and that's exactly what happened. Because he interrupted her a few times, oh, it must be sexism. I mean, they spent a long time, I didn't watch the whole thing, the whole post-election, post-debate analysis, but they spent a long time basically towing that narrative that there is something sexist going on. Well, the obvious way to look at this would be Mike Pence had a debate with Tim Kaine 4 years ago when Kaine was Hillary Clinton's VP pick. And there was a lot of interrupting going on then. I have to say more Tim Kaine than Mike Pence, but there was interrupting both ways. Um, this is a fundamental problem with feminist logic. When they find sexism in areas of male female debates, but they ignore exactly the same situation playing out in male male debates. So the point is, if, for the sake of argument, Pence was talking down to Harris or interrupting her just because she's a woman, which is the pathetic line that CNN is towing, then he wouldn't have done that with Tim Kaine as a man. But he did. Or rather, it worked both ways. Actually, Tim Kaine interrupted a lot in that debate. Um, but this is the thing. Feminists seem to bring up the sexism argument pretty much every time a woman politician is criticised. I mean, it's so predictable. Every time a woman politician is criticised, oh, it must be because she's a woman. This gets very nauseating actually because it's a way of stifling debate. It's a way of saying that almost ironically, it's patronising to her because it's saying that she needs to be protected from criticism, particularly by men. Now, I accept that there may be some areas where female politicians are judged in a different way. For example, in terms of what clothes they wear, they may be judged more than men in that sense. But frankly, I'm a little bit tired of feminists always towing out the same lines. For example, if a man criticizes a woman leader, it must be because insecure and he doesn't like women in power. This is a very lazy argument because they don't bother to say, well, have you voted for women? Because that would counter that notion. If a man doesn't like women in power and he feels threatened by them or something like that, then he wouldn't vote for them. Now, to use myself as an example, I've voted for men and women, depending on the particular candidate, depending on the policies, depending what I think of the record. In the last general election, I voted for my local MP, who happened to be a woman. I voted for her because I respected the work she'd done on a committee looking at reality TV. And I think she's a pretty decent MP. She's not a perfect MP, but I felt confident enough in her to give her my vote, even though she's Labour and I don't usually vote Labour. Um, but feminist logic is if I criticize a woman in power, oh, I'm insecure. So I would argue actually male politicians have to walk on eggshells because, any perception that he is even disagreeing with a woman can be perceived as sexism according to these people. It just gets very tiresome. And, it's a real balance because if he is overtly polite and tries to be, not too robust in his differing of opinion, then he's patronizing. Oh, he just sees her as a little woman and that's patronizing. But if he talks to her in the same way he might talk to a man, then always being a bully, he's being harsh. You can't talk to her because like that because she's a woman. Feminists can't have it both ways. They can't say that women are treated differently because they're women, but then criticize men for treating women the same way they treat men. Um, you just can't have it both ways. So I think the Pence-Harris debate is an example of this. Um, Assuming that Kamala Harris becomes vice president, that is, if the Trump legal challenges aren't successful, assuming she becomes vice president, I think she probably will. I think Biden will become president. If she is a strong vice president, that will be nothing to do with her being a woman. If she is a weak vice president, it will be nothing to do with her being a woman. Just like Obama's strengths and weaknesses were nothing to do with him being African American. I appreciate those demographic factors may influence a politician's discourse, their worldview, even. But people are individuals, and feminists, more often than not, don't see people as individuals. They see them as men and women. They tribalize people in that sense along gender lines, just like race baiters tribalize people along racial lines. And it just gets very tiresome. If you support a woman, that's great. Maybe you admire her, maybe you think she's a strong leader, but don't make the argument she's strong because she's a woman. That's a fundamentally sexist argument. The implication is, oh, well, men must be bad because they're men. Um, I have a big problem with that because I think it's divisive by nature. And I also have a big problem with this lazy argument that feminists make that if a man disagrees with them, he's somehow insecure. How is that insecure? It's just a difference of opinion. Now, if he's being obviously sexist, that's a different matter. If he talks to her in a way that he wouldn't talk to men, then okay, maybe it is sexist. But I think that's relatively rare. I really do. Because I think most men in politics know full well what the optics would be if they were sexist. Um, I'm not saying there aren't sexist men, by the way. I'm just saying that feminists need to stop claiming that is always the case because that's what they do. It's just very tiresome. Very tiresome. Let me know your thoughts.